Welcome everyone to Impolite Company on the GCPR.live network. It's the show where we do what, we've always said not to do, talk about religion and politics. I'm your host, Matthew Best. Together, we walk through honest dialogue, explore messy truths, and try to see the humanity in perspectives different from our own. If you got a thought, question, something you want to challenge, or got other resources, whatever, you can email me at contactimpolitecompany@gmail.com. Don't forget, you can subscribe to past and future episodes if you go on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube. It's where you can find all the shows from that have been going on. You just search for Impolite Company, look for the logo. There you go. If you like to dig deeper into the themes that we explore, you can visit my blog at pastormatthewbest.com. And always appreciate any support that you offer. Buymeacoffee.com/impolite company. So let's dive into the show. Today, it's just been on my mind that I really want to spend some time talking about. This is right. This is how my mind works. I love diving into deep topics, right? So the deep topic that I have for today is about immigration, foreigners, xenophobia, all that kind of great stuff, right? Why? I think there's a lot of reasons. One, this is something that we have struggled with in this country for a long, long time. There is a book, America for Americans, The History of Xenophobia in the United States. It's by Erica Lee. I read it last year. It's an excellent book. Also very difficult to get through just because of all the examples of xenophobia and the long history in this country, both politically, religious, culturally, and everything else. The point of this is not to beat up on the United States and the culture. All right. So let's just set this straight in this, right? We are a country that, like so many other things, we are a country that's made up of human beings, and human beings are often doing things that can sometimes be wonderful and at the same time can also be horrible. So it's not unique necessarily to the United States, but this is where I live. So I want to talk about this. This is the other part of this is we're a nation, we're a country that is often on two opposing paths at the same time. You could talk about this when it comes to racism and race issues, right? We're a country that has these unbelievable aspirations of equality, of diversity, inclusion, all these type of things. There's legislation that has passed over the decades to improve things. We're talking about voting rights and also right anti-discrimination laws, all sorts of things, right? Moving in one direction, very aspirational, of moving people in the direction of seeing how similar we are. And at the same time, we have a long history as well of doing acts that are detrimental to people, just horrible things. And that we're talking about things like lynching, we're talking about segregation, Jim Crow laws, all that type of stuff. At the same time, this is something that is really fascinating about this country is this both and. If that's not very Lutheran, I don't know what is. Both and. We are a country of both and. Both aspirational and whatever the antithesis of aspirational is, at the same time, moving along both of those with the same type of intensity, oftentimes. So it's a both and type of thing. So I want to take some time to talk about xenophobia. Xenophobia, very simply, if you take a look at the Greek there, it has to do with fear of the foreigners, fear of a foreigner. I mean, that's literally what the word breaks down into. This would be the opposite of this is xenophilia, which is love of foreigner, right? So there's your two. We have both going on, right? Because in our country we have a long history of of immigration and a country of immigrants, really. Um, so it's an essential part of who this country is. And at the same time, we have a long history of xenophobia as well. And so I want to talk about that. So we're gonna break this up into really kind of two parts. One is talking about a little bit about some scripture around this, and second, some history around this, and really using the book "America for Americans" by Erica Lee as the foundation of this, because she had a really nice summary of this history of xenophobia here in the United States. So that's the goal for this time for the next 54 minutes or so. So we're going to start with some scripture because I think this is really important. This has been a theme. If you want to think about themes of scripture, welcoming the stranger has been a consistent theme throughout throughout the scripture, whether we're talking about Old Testament, New Testament, really doesn't matter what we're talking about when it comes to this. Um, so let's identify some of this. And this is not minor either, right? I mean, what is welcoming the stranger about? So this has to do with hospitality. This is a hospitality issue when it comes to scripture. Again, think about this. The culture of scripture is really this Middle Eastern culture, which has a heavy emphasis on hospitality. Um, Very important, right? So welcoming the stranger is uh, is about hospitality. It's also about seeing the image of God in the other person. This is moving past our tribalistic tendencies that humanity has, that assuming that someone's a part of your tribe, therefore they're safe. Someone who's not part of your tribe, starting with the assumption that they're in danger. However, we're defining that idea of a tribe. This also, if you want to think about it in terms of scripture, has to do with shalom. What is shalom? It's something I love to talk about. Shalom is the idea of wholeness, right? And so what is welcoming the foreigner have to do with wholeness? A lot. It's not that there's this we have this tendency to try and think that there's not enough. It's the antithesis of shalom in that sense, right? And so if there's not enough, then we need to keep other people out. Well, that's not very shalom oriented. Shalom is wholeness, completeness, enoughness, right? That's what God's creation is all about. That's what God has been about all of the time, has been about enoughness. There is enough. There is enough, right? And so the idea of xenophobia, one of the arguments that comes up is there's not enough. Well, that kind of goes against what we're talking about here. It goes against the idea of seeing the image of God in others as well. So we want to talk about some of these things. So just, and I don't know that I'm going to go through all of these, but I think it's important to take a look at what the scripture offers when it comes to welcoming the stranger, because there is a consistent theme that happens with this, that regardless of what a country is going to do, we as followers of God have a responsibility to do certain things if we're really going to be following God. If we're going to follow Jesus, if we're Christians, then we have a responsibility. We can't necessarily determine what a country will do, but we do have a responsibility of what we will do, and what we will participate in and what we will push back on. Um, I can't control what the laws of the country are, but I can live a certain way in this. So again, there's this both and type of thing. So you got Leviticus 19, 33, 34, one of the most common referenced scriptures when it comes to this. When a foreigner resides among you, do not mistreat them. The foreigner resides among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, right? This is Leviticus. This is the law that we're talking about here. And if you're going to dismiss this, well, then why are you dismissing this and not other passages that are right around it? Why is this no longer valid, right? I'm like, what's going on with that? Why the excuse? I mean, if you just don't want to care about the foreigner, just come out and say that. Don't here, look, this is Leviticus, right? Similar Deuteronomy 10:19 again, this is about the law. Love the sojourner, therefore for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. This is giving instruction of how we're supposed to treat others in this. Exodus 22, you shall not wrong a foreigner or oppress him, for you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. How about that? Deuteronomy quoting Exodus. Uh, Deuteronomy 24 commands leaving leftovers from the harvest for the foreigner, the orphan, the widow. This, what's there's the phrase. There's a lot of food pantries that do this. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank right now. This is where this command, this is where the idea comes from, and then it'll show up in other places as well about that. Ezekiel 47 directs the foreigner be given an inheritance as if they were native born. Oh boy, that could be a big problem for people who don't want foreigners to have anything. This whole notion of driving out the foreigner um, is troubling in numerous ways. Um, it really comes from the sense of fear. I can't really emphasize this enough. I think this is one of the things that we need to listen to why a person or a politician or a group of folks, what the reasoning is. It's oftentimes not the stated reason either. We'll get into the arguments about this shortly. But we need to listen and then listen below the surface level of what's going on. Right? A lot of the scripture here is dealing with this kind of very, hey, you're supposed to treat foreigners as if you treat someone like yourself. Right? This is kind of the golden rule, if you want to think about it that way, in terms of New Testament language. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? This is the idea of just because somebody is from somewhere else does not give you the right to be cruel to somebody in this. New Testament has a bunch of passages as well. Matthew 25, again, one of the most famous. Matthew 25 is where Jesus is giving this, telling this story about the judgment of the nations, right? It's the separating the sheep from the goats. And in there, when were you, you know, what, it's Matthew 25. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. As you did to the least of these, you did it to me, right? That's the summary version. What, Lord, when did we see you and you were a stranger? Well, what you did to the least of these, you did to me. This is what Jesus is saying. And it's the judgment of the nations. It's not the judgment of the individuals. It's the judgment of the nations that Jesus is talking about. There's a corporate, a communal aspect to this. How you treat the foreigner in your laws and your policies and your culture is exactly how you're treating Jesus. It's also if we're being cruel or unusually harsh to a foreigner, what does it say about ourselves? That's the real question. What is this saying about ourselves when we act this way? And I know I've heard all the arguments about this. Well, you can't just have open borders. I don't think that's what this. It's not an either or complete openness with nothing or complete shutdown. The world is more complicated than either or. It's messy. It's completely messy. And this either or mentality, number one, is not helpful. Number two, oftentimes what gets rolled into this is this argument of, well, foreigners cause a lot of crime and all that. Well, statistically, that's just not there. You can Google that. Natural born American citizens are far more dangerous than foreign born folks who are here. That's statistic. You can Google that and you can find a variety of statistics that show this. But again, it's not about statistics. So I am not even going to go and cite a specific thing because you can Google this and you can find it. The question is, are you going to accept that reality? And if not, that says more about your identity and what you're attached to than anything else. I mean, this gets into the whole idea that human beings aren't really all that rational as far as rational logic determining what we're going to end up believe. We will find a rationale to support what it is that we want to support ultimately. Um, this gets into there's another book, Good Reasonable People. It's an excellent book. This gets into the whole idea of the psychological bottom line. We will defend ourselves and those we are associated with as good, reasonable people. That is the bottom line, becomes the most important. And so any fact or figure that gets in the way of that will be dismissed out of hand. There doesn't need to be even any logic. This is what human beings do. Okay, I know I'm jumping around all over the place, but there's a lot. There's a lot. Hebrews 13:2, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it. Again, another famous passage of scripture. This has to do with hospitality. This has to do with hospitality. God is always invitational, right? This is another aspect that we see. This is about loving people. It's about caring for the stranger. Um, and why do we care about the stranger? If you're moving from one place to another, that's a huge decision, first of all. You're leaving behind everything that you're familiar with. It could also include a language, but it's certainly a culture, possibly, most likely, family, friends, relationships, possibly career, leaving it all behind to go to another land. Number one, you're taking a huge risk. Number two, there's a lot you don't know. And so the sense of the person who's in the other land showing hospitality is a recognition of how difficult that is. In seminary, our family had the opportunity to go to Finland for a year. And we did that. Four children, my wife and myself, we each got to take two suitcases with us. That's what we were allowed to take on the plane. And we were going, and we had only had email contact with the person we were going to meet at the airport, who was representing the Lutheran Church of Finland, who was going to meet us at the airport. So I had a picture. Had never met this person in person, and we didn't know anyone else. Studied a little bit of the language. Understood a little bit about things, right? You had a little bit of advanced knowledge about this. So it's not like we were just up and left. Um, but boy, I remember when we first started off, the first trip to the grocery store was like 2 to 3 hours long because buying basic things was a challenge because we were not familiar with the language enough. We didn't know how certain things are packaged differently in different cultures. You know, and so like for example, in Finland, mustard looks like a toothpaste tube. It's not like in a bottle like here in the United States. Plus, you're dealing with a foreign language. Now you got to figure out what is it that I'm actually trying to buy. It took a long time and it was exhausting figuring out all of that. Figuring out how to use the washer and the dryer was an adventure. because the washer and dryer were very different than what we were used to. And My wife had this situation where there was a repairman, a maintenance guy for in the complex that we lived in, who came and he didn't speak any English. So we had a language barrier and he's using hand motions to kind of walk us through. And it took a while to figure it out, right? Small little examples that emphasize the point that when somebody goes from one place to another, there's there's a lot of change and there's a lot of not being familiar with how things work in another culture. You have to learn, right? And so the sense of hospitality is also a sense of humility in this. These are important theological aspects, human aspects, whatever you want to call it. Um, uh, Romans 12, not Romans 13, Romans 12, which frames Romans 13, which is important. We've talked about Romans 13. Romans 12:13, practice hospitality. Again, it's really important. Um, we see examples of this in scripture. This is not just this declaration. This is God practicing this. Abraham, what does Abraham do? He gets up and he leaves his home in Ur and he goes until the place where God says, "Now you've arrived." And if you think that he just survived all out on his own, I'm sorry, but that's just not the case. It requires other people to survive, right? When in the Old Testament you have strangers coming to visit a variety of different patriarchs and whatnot, these are angels in disguise. And the idea is, how are you treating the stranger in this? Jesus is often traveling, going to different places. How is the stranger being treated? When he comes across other people, how is he treating people? Hospitality, humility, um, understanding that what somebody is going through is not easy and it's risky, right? All these type of things really important. The parable of the Good Samaritan is really a story of this hospitality, of caring for somebody. In that case, it's also loving your enemies, which has to do with caring about the foreigner as well. Um, I, there's a lot that's going on there. Um, uh, Third John 1, praises it's a passage. The Third John 1, 5 to 8 praises those who show faithful support to strangers in their travels. First Peter 4, 9, offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Um, you got Ephesians, which highlights that believers are no longer strangers but members of the same household. There's the story of the road to Emmaus, where there's these two disciples and they come across a stranger who happens to be Jesus, and they show hospitality to him, which would of course be in a dangerous situation as well. They just experienced the death of Jesus right before, right? And here they are, they're traveling, and there's been this resurrection which has happened, is what they heard stories about. There's a lot of danger of for followers of Jesus, and they show hospitality to a stranger. Lots of stories about showing hospitality to strangers. This is something that is biblical. It's something that is a part of faith. And the the essential part of this is that this is exactly what God does with us. Because of our broken relationship with God, we have become estranged. And what does God do? God gives us grace and mercy. Grace is getting what you don't deserve. Mercy is not getting what you do deserve. Right? So it's not a matter of treating foreigners a certain way because, oh, they've earned something. That's got nothing to do with it. You treat people with humility and hospitality because they exist. That's it. And it's the same thing of what you would hope you would be treated as well. If you go somewhere else, do you expect to be treated in an unfair and an unkind way? No, of course not. Why would you? So you offer the same thing in return. Now, there are some people who don't ever travel. Okay, that's their loss. That doesn't give an excuse then to be cruel to someone, doesn't give an excuse to be inhumane to someone. The idea is to have humility, to show hospitality, to welcome the stranger. Welcoming the stranger is not about the idea of giving them a pass to do whatever they want. Again, it's not all or nothing. This is a big problem that we have with when we have these debates about immigration, is that oftentimes we end up in this all or nothing type of debate, which is not helpful at all. And I don't know of anybody who's at the extremes of all or nothing. Um, Even the people who are xenophobic, it's not a nothing. They're still gonna accept certain groups of people, mostly like themselves. So it's not all or nothing. When we frame things in those type of absolutist senses, think about it. Why do people do this? Well, because it offers certainty, and certainty gives us a sense of control. That there is a specific answer and we know the right answer and we can say it in a matter of seconds. And it frames our world, which is chaotic, into a sense that is we can grab hold of it and have some stability in it. Problem is that's not how the world operates. We're living in a fantasy world when we think that the world is nice and simple and into either or situations, and it's not. It never has been, it never will be. And that's okay. That's okay. So, um, what else I want to talk about as far as scripture goes? I think that's a good framing for scripture. Um, I guess one last thing. Again, we already mentioned this. Exodus 23:9. Again, showing hospitality to strangers. Again, it's also this reminder that the Israelites were once strangers themselves. That is a key aspect of this. Uh, is that, whether we're talking about the Israelites or whether we're talking about here, the United States, uh, the vast majority of the people who live here now, as far as the white population goes, at some point trace their family back to somewhere else. I don't know of any white folks who are in this country whose families were here um, before people from Europe came and colonized, or however we want to talk about that. Um, we all trace families back to somewhere else. Therefore, while we may not have done that traveling ourselves, while we may not have um, uprooted our lives and were placed in a different location ourselves, in a literal sense, our families have. We have been strangers in the land. And how were we treated? That's the important point of this. All right, I want to take a brief pause for a moment. Again, a couple of things that I care deeply about, and I want to invite you to be a part of. First is Christ Lutheran Church in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the church that I serve as the pastor. And it's more than a congregation, it's also a health ministry. We have 3 free health clinics that operate out of this church. I also act as the executive director. And if you're in the Harrisburg area, I welcome you to come and see. You can schedule a tour right on the website, christharrisburg.org. Up in the upper right-hand corner, it says schedule a tour. I want to encourage you to do that if you're here in South Central Pennsylvania. And secondly, we always are in need of support. We literally can't do this on our own. This is a poor congregation, and 90% of our revenue comes from outside sources that allow us to be able to have a huge healing impact on so many people. In the course of a year, it's easily 10,000 visits of people coming and getting the help that they need. We are at the very bottom of the healthcare system. The next stop below us, if you want to think about it, is the street. So people come to us because they got nowhere else to go. And I want to invite you into supporting this ministry, supporting this congregation. If you want to talk more about that and what that might look like, or explore ways in which that can happen, there's lots of different ways that that can happen. But so send me an email. I would love to talk with you. You can fill out the form on the website. Love to talk with you and just kind of see what are you feeling drawn to? And how can we help you as well? That's the biggest thing, right? So christharrisburg.org. It's the website for the church. Second Memorial Blanket Project. Every year, people make blankets from all over the place. We've had blankets from Australia and Germany as well. To highlight the issue of homelessness, we do a display in a different location. And this year, it's going to be up in New York City. And I hope I say this right. I'm probably not saying it right. Stuyvesant Park. Again, I'm probably not saying that right, but that's where it's going to be. We're pretty excited about this. This is going to be the sixth year. Can't believe this is going to be the sixth year already. At the end of the night, we give away all of the blankets to organizations that work with those that are unhoused, to individuals who are there, who come across what we're doing, people who have a need. This is the idea of solving homelessness is not about making it someone else's problem. We are the richest nation in human history. We should not have a homelessness problem, is really what this comes down to. You can go to memorialblanket.org. And lastly, it's a book, American Roulette. It's also an audiobook, which you can go to americanroulettebook.com and get the audiobook for free. And it's going to be a graphic novel in 2027. And the other thing is we have a contract with someone who's trying to make it into a movie. Pretty exciting stuff. It's a fictional account of a mass shooting. And what makes this special is we don't offer answers, but the idea is to focus on the humanity because that has been lacking when it comes to gun violence. And I have a personal belief that if we're ever going to deal with gun violence in a way that we actually reduce the amount of violence, it starts by seeing the humanity. Kind of similar to what we're talking about today with xenophobia. So I would encourage you read the book. The authors, we don't make any money off of the book. All of the money goes to organizations that address gun violence. What we care about is trying to reduce the amount of gun violence. Um, American Roulette is the name of the book. So, all right, back to the show. So I want to talk. We spent the first half hour talking about some scripture. I want to spend this time talking a little bit about history, why this is important. So the book that, again, I'm using this because it's a nice, concise history to xenophobia here in the United States. America for Americans by Erica Lee is the name of the book. Excellent book, highly recommend it. And it talks about how xenophobia has targeted different groups throughout U.S. history. So I want to walk through a little bit about this. Um, about the actions of that have happened. And there are one, two, three, four, five, six, seven different groups that have experienced this, at least seven different groups, right? So there's a couple of points about this too. One, there's really two themes that I heard in that really kind of came out when I read this book. The first is how lazy the arguments are for xenophobia. Now, what do I mean by that? Very simply, the same arguments that were made in the 1600s are still being used today. It's just the groups change. That's it. What are those arguments? You could probably come up with those very simply. Here's a quick sample. Well, their culture is different, so they're suspect. Their language is different. Are they really loyal to this country? They're taking away our jobs. These are the same, literally the same arguments that have been made for centuries now in this land against various different groups. The groups change, the arguments are the same. That's what I mean by the arguments are lazy. There is no creativity with this. It's amazing that there could be these same arguments against different groups because it's not really about the different groups at all, ultimately. And none of it is backed up in reality. It is efforts to just get people out. It has to do with fear. It has to do with identity. That's the core of what xenophobia is really about. It's about identity and what people's identities are and what they struggle with and all of that. The second theme that comes up in this book is how indigenous people and those that are black are often ignored in our history. The two groups that have been here longer than any white settler, colonizer, whatever classification you want to talk about, and they are ignored. They're not treated as real Americans by those that embrace xenophobia. They're outsiders. They're to be ignored. All the contributions that they have made are end up being seen as not worth anything. Um, that's the core. Those two arguments that that the arguments for xenophobia are lazy, and those that are people of color are often just completely dismissed out of the history. There's a fascinating part about this that Erica Lee talks about that oftentimes when those that are defensive about xenophobia will talk about real Americans or Native Americans. That's the terminology. And they're not referring to indigenous tribes. They're talking about the people who are related to the first settlers slash colonizers who came here. So often British folks who came here. That's the so-called Native Americans because they were the first ones for the colonies, right? This is this idea of completely erasing indigenous tribes and other people of color who were already here and the contributions and how they were stewarding and taking care of the land and all of that, right? And their societies and all that goes with it. So those are the two themes. So again, I want to spend just a little bit of time going through this. The first group that experienced xenophobia were Germans. Probably wouldn't have been first on your list, but in the 1600s, the Germans were seen with suspicion. And in some places, there were more Germans than there were English. Go figure. This is where the fear comes up because German and English are, while they're related in the same family, are not the same language. And so there was, you could think of it as cultural suspicion, pressures to assimilate into the culture. Um, uh, Ben Franklin, of all people, had a statement about the Germans. He was expressing, you could say, deep concern over the refusal of German immigrants to assimilate, fearing that because they weren't learning English, that this Pennsylvania would become, quote, a colony of aliens. Ben Franklin, 1600s or 1700s by that point. Uh, the Germans, right? And so again, you've got this cultural and you've got this language. There were people who were proposing banning German language books, restricting newspapers, requiring legal documents to be in English to compel assimilation. Um, you had pamphlets and letters and whatnot uh, talking about the concern about the high density of German settlers and their unwillingness to adopt British and American customs, especially in Pennsylvania. Uh, a lot of German immigrants were in poverty. They had left. Um, they oftentimes would go into indentured servitude, um, the selling of families to pay for passage to leave Germany. And it didn't help that when you get finally to the Revolutionary War, you have German mercenaries, the Hessians, serving with the British. And so this question whether they were loyal or not. They would later prove themselves to be loyal. And this is another thing that happens is that each group that has been targeted with xenophobia oftentimes will end up being even more xenophobic towards the next group that's coming in order to show that they are loyal. It's always in that sense, in the sense to show that this other new group is worse than we are. It's a self-protection type of thing, right? So you would end up seeing anti-German xenophobia also with the world wars as well, right? This is why we end up in a lot of Lutheran churches having American flags in the sanctuary. Um, that wasn't a thing before World War One, especially, but also World War Two, um, to show loyalty to the country. And this is also where you start to shift away from German language worship, all that type of stuff that goes on in Lutheran congregations. Um, Another group, Irish, especially Irish Catholics. This is in the 19th century. Um, there were a lot of there's a lot of discrimination against Irish, especially anti-Catholic attitudes. You have exclusion from certain jobs, right? There were literally signs that said no Irish need apply for those. There are anti-immigrant riots. This is the rise in the 1840s. You had the rise of the Know Nothing Party, which is a nativist party um, because of Irish Catholics. They would, there's a whole history. The Know Nothings, fascinating group, not in a good way. They were the American Party, I think is what they were. They're official, but oftentimes it would be Know Nothings, secretive meetings that they would gather. They would it'd be just ways to be against Irish, especially Irish Catholics. Um, there was a lot of stereotypes, right? You have violence against against Irish Catholics. There was a, just to give you a couple of examples, 1831, St. Mary's Catholic Church in New York City was burned. There were riots, anti-Catholic riots in Philadelphia in 1844. Um, so you have employment restrictions. I already told you that. Then you have the stereotyping that took place and still has an effect today, where the Irish were portrayed as violent, lazy drunkards, as well as apes. That's interesting. Uh, so that's just a little bit of that. In the next group is the Chinese. Boy, they had quite an experience, especially on the West Coast. They had so there was legislation, 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned immigration as well as forced um, forced expulsion of large groups of Chinese. Discrimination. You have the Page Act in 1875, which barred Chinese women from entering the U.S. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, already mentioned that. It banned Chinese laborers for 10 years. The Scott Act of 1888 prohibited re-entry to the U.S. after a visit to China. The Geary Act in 1892 extended exclusion and required Chinese to carry certificates of residence or face deportation. The Alien Land Laws in 1913 and 1920 prohibited aliens ineligible for citizenship, which of course targeted Chinese, from owning or leasing land. You have the Immigration Act of 1924, which further restricted immigration, reinforcing the exclusion of Chinese laborers. There are massacres that happens, forced expulsions. Over 40,000 Chinese miners were forced out of California during the late 19th century Yellow Peril wave. That's what it was called. And then you have this continue with COVID-19 and the way that it's described um, in not so nice ways as the Chinese flu or whatever other ways that it ends up being described by those that are embrace xenophobia. You have the Japanese, another group that has been targeted. Of course, the biggest thing, 1942, the executive order by President Roosevelt that authorized the internment of incarceration camps of 100 was 110 to 120,000 people um, relocated. They lost property, huge economic impact, wartime restrictions, and these were oftentimes Americans that happened to have Japanese heritage. Um, they were already loyal to the country, but it didn't matter because of what their heritage was, the fear that went along with that. You have Mexicans as well. There was 1930, it was a forced repatriation. The U.S. government forcibly removed up to 2 million people of Mexican descent, which 40 to 60% of them were U.S. citizens. You have segregation in the Southwest. You got violence, there's massacres, there's riots, all sorts of things. And of course, now you have these mass deportations going on. This is a continuation of all the stuff that takes place. It's not counting other groups. Boy, spending time just going through the history is amazing, right? Jews who have experienced anti-Semitic incidences. That's been on the rise in the last several years. Um, right, we have shootings, we have bombings of synagogues, um, arson attacks, all this. You have Muslims who have experienced discrimination and violence as well, vandalism of mosques, harassment, discrimination, what people wear, Muslim travel bans, um, uh, there are over 230 anti-Muslim bills that have been introduced or enacted since 2010. There's lots of political rhetoric, all sorts of stuff. In the last 10 minutes, now you got all this history, right? And I probably didn't cover all the groups. I did want to go through that history because I think it's important. And again, this goes back to the very beginning. There's a long history of xenophobia in the United States. It is ingrained into who this country is. And it's not the only path that we have been on, right? We again are on this both and path. There's the aspirational side, which is the welcoming of immigrants. It's the, if you want to know an embodied version of that, it's the Statue of Liberty with the poem that's on it. Give us your tired, your poor, all of that, right? And immigration is the essential story of what the United States is. And at the same time, you have this history of xenophobia, which is so very interesting that we have both of these going on at the same time, moving further and further apart from each other. I again, I want to get at the core of why does xenophobia exist? It's a fear, ultimately, a fear of the other. But it's not just the fear of an outside threat. I think the core of it is a fear of what's inside, of self-examination, a fear of recognizing oneself in another and seeing how very similar somebody is that may be different, may look different or sound different or worship different or whatever the case may be. There are far more similarities than there are differences. Well, what do I mean by that? We all have to breathe. We all have to eat. We all eat the same way. Food goes in our mouth and we chew and we swallow. We all have to breathe. There's two options for that, through the nose and through the mouth. If someone has the ability, which most people do, they're speaking words, sounds that are conveying ideas. People have to work, and there's dignity in work. They have families, right? Loved ones, a spouse, children, whatever the case may be, whatever that family makeup, there are families, regardless of what those families look like. Humans need housing. We need to be in some kind of housing. Humans like to be in community type of settings. We have history. We have a history that helps form an identity. A lot of there's all these different things, right? And so I think the core of xenophobia comes down to a fear of self-examination. It's something about the self that isn't steady, that isn't sure, that doesn't feel certain. Uh, Xenophobia offers a way of pushing someone away rather than drawing closer to them. Xenophobia is essentially saying that other person is so different, and their difference is a threat rather than a mirror. And so, what often happens with xenophobia is a projection, right? These are projections that are done. This is why I told you before that the arguments for xenophobia are really lazy. It's the same arguments. It doesn't matter which one of these groups that we're talking about, the same arguments. They're taking away our jobs. That was the argument that people of German descent were experiencing. That's what the whole idea of no Irish need apply. That's what the Chinese Exclusion Act was all about. That's what this forced deportation of Mexicans that we had experienced. That's what all of these things, it's the same argument. It's just a different group. Because at some point, the Germans became okay and they were seen as white. Uh, it has nothing to do necessarily with the skin color. White isn't a skin color; it's a status type of thing that's going on. So at some point, the arguments that were made against the Germans shifted from the Germans to the Irish. Now, all of a sudden, those German folks were no longer taking away our jobs. Now it was another group that was supposedly taking our jobs. The same German people were still here. Nothing changed about that. But all of a sudden, they were no longer seen as a threat. They were no longer questioned as far as their loyalty. Xenophobia is not is not about logic. Just like so much of what we experience is not about logic. We will find whatever logic or statistics to back up what we have already decided, and then we will rationalize our way. We do backwards rationalization is really what happens. This is what humans do. Xenophobia is a fear. It's a fear of the other, and it's unnecessary at its core. There's no statistics to really back it up, but it does get at the heart of our identity, and that is the key. What is it about ourselves that cause us to fear an other? Why do we think that there are us and them? What benefits do we have in actually having this belief? Well, it secures that notion of that tribal sense of us and them. It gives a sense of security, gives a sense of knowing who you are based on who you're not. It also then says there's somebody else to blame for your situation because it's not as good as it should be. So clearly, it's not about you and what you've done and what you haven't done. It's clearly got to be someone else's fault. Xenophobia offers all of this like a drug. That's the appeal of it. That's also why it never holds up. Just like all drugs, all the promises all fall flat. They never hold up. So anyway, xenophobia has a long history. And we also have a long history of doing some right things, moving in the right direction. But we have a long way to go, right? We didn't get into the indigenous tribes and the people that have suffered, my gosh, land being taken away, literally dying and being killed um, uh, in innumerable type of ways. But I think this is an important topic that it's important to talk about. It's important to examine, to understand the history, and to understand why would somebody be in support of xenophobia. It comes down to how do they think it benefits them? That's the core of it. And if you can get at that, then you can start to get around and go through that and say, okay, what is it about you that you're afraid of? Because that's really what it comes down to is there's this core sense of fear. And if you can deal with people's fears, you can move them past these type of things, help them see this is what the brokenness in themselves, help them see how they're similar to other people, whether they like it or not, and see that if they were in the other person's shoes, how would they want to be treated? How can you connect with somebody and give them room to grow? That's a key. It's got to be. You got to have room to grow because if there is no room to grow and it's all judgment, people are going to hold on to it because it's safer that way. All right. I hope you have a great day and just keep plugging away. Keep having a hope and just keep the faith. All right. With that, I will talk to you later. Bye.